The transport ship hummed with alien technology as 300 bewildered humans pressed their faces against viewing ports, staring at the impossible sight before them. A massive structure the size of a small moon hung in space, its crystalline spires reaching out like grasping fingers toward distant stars. This was the Stellar Command Academy, and none of the humans aboard had volunteered to be here. Tom Reed adjusted his worn military jacket and tried to make sense of what had happened. 3 days ago, he had been training recruits at Fort Bragg. Then the sky had split open like torn fabric, and beings made of light had stepped through speaking perfect English. They called themselves representatives of something called the Galactic Defense Coalition. They needed soldiers, they said. Earth had been chosen, the selection process had been swift and merciless. Military bases across Earth had been scanned, and 300 personnel had simply vanished in beams of silver light. No explanations to families. No time to pack belongings. Just a brief medical examination by floating metal spheres and transportation to this ship racing through the void between stars. Amy Foster, a former Air Force pilot, sat beside Tom with her arms crossed. Her short red hair was still regulation length, though regulations seemed meaningless now. She had been in the middle of a training flight when the beam had taken her, leaving her wingmen to wonder where she had gone. The aliens had been polite but firm when she demanded answers. Earth was primitive, they explained. Humans were expendable. The galaxy needed fresh minds to fight an enemy that conventional tactics could not defeat. "Look at that thing," Dave Mitchell muttered from across the narrow aisle. The Marine captain had bite marks on his knuckles from his first meeting with their alien escorts. He had not taken the kidnapping well. How do they expect us to compete with whatever built that? Through the viewing port, the academy grew larger by the hour. Its surface crawled with activity as ships arrived and departed through massive docking bays. Each vessel was different, representing technologies and design philosophies from across the galaxy. Some looked like living creatures with organic curves and breathing hulls. Others were geometric nightmares of angles that hurt human eyes, too. A few seemed to be made entirely of energy, their forms shifting between states of matter. The human transport was clearly the most primitive vessel in sight. Its metal hull was scarred and patched, held together by what appeared to be the galactic equivalent of duct tape. Even their escorts seemed embarrassed by it. Inside the academy, things became worse. The docking bay stretched beyond human comprehension, filled with beings that challenged every assumption about life in the universe. Creatures with too many limbs sorted cargo with mechanical precision. Floating jellyfish-like entities communicated through patterns of colored light. Humanoid figures in environmental suits gestured with appendages that might have been arms or tentacles or something else entirely. Bob Santos, an army engineer, whistled low as they were herded through the facility. The architecture defied physics as he understood it. Corridors bent upward into loops that somehow led forward. Gravity shifted directions without warning, allowing foot traffic on walls and ceilings. The very air seemed to shimmer with energy patterns that made his instruments buzz with confused readings. Their escort was a tall, elegant being who introduced himself as Instructor Vega of the Hegemony Empire. His species resembled humans, but stretched into impossible proportions, with limbs that were too long and joints that bent in too many directions. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple vocal cords operating in concert. "You will be assigned quarters." In Section 7, Vega explained as they walked through halls filled with alien cadets. "This area has been modified for your atmospheric and gravitational requirements. You will attend orientation tomorrow, followed by placement examinations." The alien students they passed looked at the humans with expressions that were difficult to read across species barriers. Some seemed curious. Others appeared dismissive. A few showed what might have been pity. None looked impressed. Lisa Wong, a Navy communications specialist, noticed how the alien cadets moved with unconscious coordination. Groups of the same species walked in perfect formation without apparent effort. Different species maintained careful distances from each other, following some invisible protocol. The humans shambled along in a loose pack, bumping into each other and gawking at everything like tourists. Their quarters were Spartan but functional. Each human received a small room with a bed, desk, and what appeared to be an alien computer terminal. The walls were covered with symbols that might have been instructions or warnings or decorative art, without translation software. And there was no way to tell. Rick Turner, a Special Forces operative, tested the room's security immediately. The door responded to his approach, sliding open with a soft chime. There were no visible locks or restraints. Either the Academy trusted its students completely, or escape was so impossible that precautions were unnecessary. The first meal was served in a vast cafeteria that could have held a football stadium. Thousands of alien cadets filled tables arranged by species, each group consuming foods that ranged from recognizable to horrifying. The humans were directed to a small section where plates of synthesized protein awaited them. The food was nutritious, but flavorless, clearly designed by computers rather than chefs. Commander Thane made his appearance during this meal. The Academy's commanding officer was a member of the Hegemony Empire. Like Instructor Vega, but where Vega seemed merely condescending, Thane radiated authority and barely contained disdain. His uniform was covered with insignia that probably represented achievements humans could not comprehend. "Welcome to the Stellar Command Academy," Thane announced, his voice carrying easily across the massive space without amplification. "For 5,000 years, this institution has trained the finest military minds in the galaxy. You represent 12 species, each contributing their unique strengths to the Coalition's defense." His eyes found the human section, and his expression hardened slightly. "Some of you come from civilizations that have mastered faster-than-light travel for millennia. Others have conquered death itself through technological transcendence. And some," he paused meaningfully, "are here because the galaxy is desperate. Enough to try anything." The insult was clear enough that even species barriers could not hide it. Several alien cadets turned to stare at the human section with renewed interest. Tom felt his jaw clench, but there was nothing to be done. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely dependent on alien technology for survival. The void. "Hunters threaten everything we have built," Thane continued. "They consume worlds, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. Traditional strategies have failed against them. Perhaps," his tone suggested he doubted it, "fresh perspectives will succeed where wisdom has not." After the meal, the humans gathered in Tom's room to discuss their situation. The door sealed behind them, but whether for privacy or security was unclear. "We're lab rats," Amy stated flatly. "They're throwing us at this problem to see what happens." "Could be worse," Dave replied. "Could be dissection tables instead of classrooms." Bob was studying the alien computer terminal, trying to understand its interface. "The technology gap is incredible. We're like cavemen trying to understand nuclear reactors. How are we supposed to compete with students who grew up with this stuff?" Rick had been quiet during the discussion, but now he spoke up. "Maybe that's the point. They said traditional strategies aren't working. Maybe being cavemen is exactly what they need." Through the room's small window, the Academy continued its ancient routines. Alien cadets moved through corridors with purposeful efficiency. Instructors conducted lessons using technologies that bent reality itself. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the Academy's lights, an enemy called the Void Hunters prepared to devour everything the galaxy had spent. Millennia building, the humans had been summoned to help save civilization itself. None of them yet realized that civilization might need saving from them instead. 3 weeks into their Academy training, the humans had managed to fail spectacularly at nearly everything. Tom Reed stared at his test results on the holographic display, watching alien symbols that somehow conveyed his complete inadequacy in advanced quantum mechanics. The hegemony students solved these problems in their heads. The collective species worked through them with shared consciousness. Humans needed calculators for basic arithmetic when numbers reached the billions. The morning tactical assessment had been equally humiliating. Amy Foster watched alien cadets coordinate fleet movements through neural links and telepathic networks, while humans passed notes like schoolchildren. Her flight simulation scores ranked dead last among all species despite her years of experience. As a pilot, the alien craft responded to thought commands, faster than she could physically move her hands, but something strange was beginning to happen in the practical exercises. The siege warfare simulation took place in a virtual recreation of a fortress, world under attack. Standard doctrine called for a three-pronged assault following established coalition battle principles. The hegemony team executed their attack with mathematical precision, their elongated forms moving in perfect synchronization. The collective species swarmed the defenses using their hive mind coordination. Other alien teams followed variations of the same basic strategy. Then came the human team's turn. Tom studied the fortress layout for exactly 30 seconds before throwing the approved battle plan into the recycling unit. Dave, can your Marines get through those maintenance tunnels without being detected? Dave Mitchell squinted at the holographic display. Probably. Looks like standard industrial design. Why? Because while everyone else hammers the front door, we're going to sneak in through the basement. Instructor Vega observed from the control room, his impossibly long fingers drumming against his console. This approach is highly irregular. The maintenance systems are not considered valid tactical routes. Are they sealed? Tom asked. Well, no, but doctrine clearly states, then they're fair game. The simulation began with the human team splitting into 3 groups instead of following the prescribed formation. While Dave led a squad through the maintenance tunnels, Amy took a small team to create noise and confusion at the main gate. The third group, led by Bob Santos, began systematically overloading the fortress power grid. The defending AI, programmed to counter traditional tactics, found itself dealing with attacks from directions that were not supposed to exist. Maintenance tunnels were not supposed to carry assault troops. Power systems were not supposed to be weaponized by overloading them into explosions. Diversionary attacks were not supposed to be led by single fighters making impossible maneuvers. The human team captured the fortress in half the time of any previous attempt. Instructor Vega stared at the results display in silence. Finally he spoke. This victory was achieved through violation of established protocols. In actual combat, such disregard for procedure would result in disaster. Tom shrugged. In actual combat, results matter more than procedures. Word of the humans' unorthodox success spread through the academy faster than gossip. Alien cadets who had previously ignored the primitive humans began watching their training sessions. Some requested permission to observe human tactical discussions, though they were universally denied by instructors who considered such exposure potentially contaminating. The flight simulation incident occurred 2 days later. Amy found herself assigned to an impossible scenario, a single fighter against a dozen enemy craft in an asteroid field. Every other cadet who attempted the simulation had been destroyed within minutes. The exercise was designed to teach acceptance of inevitable defeat while maximizing damage to enemy forces. Amy lasted 15 minutes before her virtual fighter was finally destroyed, but not before eliminating 11 of the 12 enemy craft. When Instructor Vega reviewed the flight recorder data, his expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching horror. Cadet Foster, you deliberately damaged your own engines during the engagement. This action disabled your defensive systems and made your craft unpredictable to the point of dangerous instability. Amy nodded, made me harder to target too. They kept expecting me to behave like a rational pilot. Rational pilots do not intentionally cripple their own vessels. Rational pilots also don't win impossible scenarios. The Academy's response was swift and predictable. Additional instructors were assigned to human training sessions to ensure proper protocol compliance. More stringent guidelines were established for acceptable tactical approaches. The difficulty of simulations was increased to force humans back into conventional strategies, but the damage was already done. Rick Turner noticed it first during a mixed species training exercise. His team included 2 hegemony cadets, a collective unit, and an apex hunter whose reflexes operated at superhuman speeds. The objective was to secure a building filled with hostile forces using standard room-clearing procedures. The alien cadets performed flawlessly, following doctrine that had been refined over millennia. They moved with mechanical precision, covered angles properly, and communicated through established protocols. They also got bogged down in a 15-minute firefight with defenders, who knew exactly what to expect. Rick's approach was different. While his alien teammates engaged the defenders directly, he found a loading dock, convinced a maintenance worker to let him borrow a cargo lifter, and drove it straight through the building's main wall. The exercise was over in 3 minutes. The hegemony cadets stared at the hole in the wall where a perfectly functional door had been moments before. This action caused significant property damage, one of them pointed out. Mission accomplished, though, Rick replied. But the building will be repaired? The hostages are safe? We won. It was the first time in Academy history that cadets had openly questioned the priority of infrastructure. Preservation over mission objectives. Lisa Wong discovered the full extent of human influence during a communications exercise. The scenario involved coordinating 3 different species in a joint operation, despite their incompatible communication systems. Standard procedure called for translation through the Academy's central computer network, creating delays but ensuring accuracy. The human approach was characteristically direct. Lisa taught hand signals to the alien cadets using basic gestures that transcended language barriers. When the aliens protested that such primitive methods were unreliable, she demonstrated their effectiveness by coordinating a complex maneuver in complete radio silence. The alien cadets were fascinated. Here was a communication system that could not be jammed, intercepted, or corrupted by electronic warfare. It was so primitive that it had not occurred to their advanced civilizations to consider it. More disturbing to the instructors was what happened next. The alien cadets began teaching each other human hand signals. Species that had maintained formal protocols for centuries started using casual gestures during conversations. The careful hierarchies that kept different species segregated began showing cracks as cadets discovered they could communicate directly rather than through official channels. Commander Thane called an emergency meeting of the Academy's senior staff. The topic was officially listed as Evaluation of Human Integration. Progress, but everyone knew what it really meant. The humans are contaminating our other students, Instructor Vega reported. Their disregard for established procedures is spreading to other species. Cadets are questioning doctrines that have maintained order for millennia. What are their test scores? Thane asked. Academically, they remain at the bottom of all rankings. Their understanding of advanced concepts is primitive at best. However, Go quotes reluctantly. Their practical exercise performance has been unprecedented. They consistently achieve objectives that other cadets consider impossible. Through violation of established protocols? Through methods that work. The meeting continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The human program would continue, but under stricter supervision. Additional safeguards would be implemented to prevent their influence from spreading further. The Academy's traditions had survived for 5,000 years. They would not be overturned by a handful of primitives, but in the dormitories that night, alien cadets gathered in small groups to practice human hand signals. They whispered about tactics that prioritized results over procedures. For the first time in Academy history, students were learning from each other rather than just from their instructors. Bob Santos lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the alien students in nearby rooms discussing human methods in a dozen different languages. Tomorrow would bring new attempts to force humans back into conventional thinking. There would be harder tests, stricter oversight, and more emphasis on following proper procedures. He smiled in the darkness. The instructors still did not understand what they were dealing with. Humans had never been particularly good at following other people's rules. What they excelled at was figuring out how to break them. The Academy's ancient dining hall buzzed with an energy that had never existed in its 5,000-year history. Alien cadets who had maintained species segregation for centuries now sat in mixed groups, gesturing frantically as they debated Human tactical approaches. The careful social order that had governed the institution since its founding was crumbling one conversation at a time. Lisa Wong pushed her synthesized protein around her plate while watching a fascinating argument between two hegemony cadets and an apex hunter. They were discussing her communications exercise from the previous week, specifically whether primitive hand signals could be considered legitimate military protocol. The hegemony cadets insisted that proper channels must be maintained. The apex hunter wanted to know why efficiency should be sacrificed for bureaucracy. 6 months ago, such a conversation would have been impossible. Different species simply did not question each other's methods or challenge established hierarchies. But humans had introduced something dangerous into the Academy's sterile environment, the concept that there might be better ways of doing things. At the human table, Dave Mitchell was sketching diagrams on a napkin while explaining urban warfare tactics to a mixed audience of alien observers. His scarred hands moved confidently as he described how humans had learned to fight in cities where conventional military doctrine failed completely. You adapt to the environment instead of trying to force the environment to adapt to you, Dave explained to a collective unit whose species communicated through shared neural networks. Buildings become cover, sewers become highways, and civilian infrastructure becomes weapons. The collective unit's 3 heads tilted in synchronized confusion. But this approach requires abandoning established chain of command protocols. How do individual units coordinate without central oversight? They figure it out as they go. Human soldiers are trained to think independently when communications break down. This concept was so alien to a hive mind species that the collective unit actually flickered between its individual personalities for several seconds. Something that had never been observed in Academy records. The turning point came during the Academy's most prestigious event, the Grand Strategy Exercise. This massive war game involved every cadet in the Academy working together to defend a simulated star system against overwhelming enemy forces. It was the final examination that determined graduation rankings and future assignments within the coalition military. The exercise had been conducted the same way for centuries. Each species contributed their traditional strengths: hegemony precision, collective coordination, apex hunter speed, and 7 other specialized approaches. The combined force would hold defensive positions, while following a carefully orchestrated battle plan developed by the Academy's master strategist. The human contingent was assigned a minor support role, providing what the planners euphemistically called adaptive logistics management. In practical terms, this meant they would handle supply runs and equipment maintenance while the real warriors conducted the actual fighting. Tom Reed read through the battle plan with growing disbelief. The defensive strategy was mathematically elegant and logically sound, with provisions for every contingency that military science could predict. It was also completely static, requiring the enemy to attack exactly as expected in order to work at all. "This is insane," Amy muttered, reviewing the fleet deployment orders. "They've got every ship locked into predetermined positions. What happens if the enemy doesn't cooperate with the plan?" Rick Turner was studying intelligence reports on the simulated attackers. "These void hunters adapt to whatever they encounter. Static defenses are exactly what they're designed to defeat." Bob Santos had been analyzing the Academy's infrastructure during their months of training. His engineer's eye had noticed things that military strategists overlooked: maintenance tunnels that connected every facility, power distribution networks that could be rerouted, and communication systems that relied too heavily on centralized control. "What if we ignore our assigned role?" Bob suggested quietly. The human leadership meeting took place in Tom's quarters. Officially unauthorized but tacitly ignored by Academy security. All 300 humans crowded into the small space, sitting on beds, floors, and each other to fit everyone inside. "The battle plan assumes the enemy will follow conventional attack patterns," Tom began. "Everything we've learned about the Void Hunters suggests they don't do conventional anything." Dave had been studying Academy records of previous Void Hunter encounters. "They're not just adaptive, they're completely unpredictable. They use swarm tactics one day and single ship raids the next. Sometimes they retreat for no apparent reason, other times they fight to total destruction. So what do we do about it? Amy asked. We do what humans do best, Rick replied. We improvise. The grand strategy exercise began with appropriate ceremony. Commander Thane addressed the assembled cadets from the Academy's Central Command Center, his elongated form radiating confidence in the time-tested strategies about to be deployed. For 5 millennia, this academy has prepared the galaxy's finest military minds for the challenges they will face among the stars, Thane announced. Today, you will demonstrate that this tradition continues unblemished. The simulated void. Hunter fleet appeared at the edge of the system exactly as the battle plan predicted. Alien cadets moved to their assigned positions with practiced efficiency. The hegemony forces established their elegant defensive formations. The collective units synchronized their movements into perfect coordination. The Apex Hunters prepared. For high-speed intercept missions, the humans were supposed to be managing supply convoys behind the main battle lines. Instead, they vanished. Every human cadet in the Academy simply disappeared from their assigned positions within the first hour of the exercise. Academy instructors frantically searched sensor networks and communication logs. Finding no trace of the missing humans anywhere in the system, the Void Hunter attack began conventionally enough, probing the defensive perimeters with small scout groups while the main fleet remained at maximum range. The alien cadets responded exactly as their training dictated, maintaining formation and following proper engagement protocols. Then the Academy's main power grid began experiencing mysterious fluctuations. Bob Santos and his engineering teams had spent the night rewiring the Academy's infrastructure, creating new pathways that bypassed central control systems. When the exercise began, they started feeding false data into the facility's sensors while rerouting power to systems that were never meant to handle such loads. The first explosion occurred in Sector 7, where an overloaded environmental processor created a spectacular light show that looked exactly like weapon fire to confuse sensors. Similar attacks began appearing throughout the Academy as humans turned the facility's own systems against it. Meanwhile, Amy Foster led a squadron of commandeered maintenance craft toward the simulated Void Hunter fleet. The small vessels were never intended for combat, lacking weapons, armor, or sophisticated defensive systems. They were also completely invisible to enemy targeting systems because no sane military force would use maintenance craft as attack vessels, the Academy's command center erupted in chaos as instructors tried to understand what was happening. Sensor displays showed attacks coming from impossible directions. Communication networks carried conflicting reports that made no tactical sense. The carefully orchestrated battle plan collapsed into confusion as commanders lost track of their own forces. Where are the humans? Thane demanded, his composed demeanor cracking for the first time in his career. Sir, we're detecting massive explosions throughout the Academy structure, but no enemy forces have penetrated our defensive perimeter. That's impossible. Our sensors would detect any attack. The main display screen flickered and changed to show Tom Reed's face. He was wearing a maintenance worker's coveralls and speaking from what appeared to be the Academy's central computer core. Commander Thane, this is the human contingent. We've captured your command center, disabled your main weapon systems, and taken control of your communication networks. The exercise is over. Stunned silence filled the command center. Finally, Thane found his voice. This is completely outside the parameters of the exercise. You were assigned support roles, not combat missions. Tom's image shrugged. You told us to help defend the system. We decided the best defense was taking out the enemy's ability to coordinate their attack. You attacked the Academy itself. We demonstrated that your defensive strategy had a fatal flaw. While you were focused on fighting the enemy fleet, we proved that a small force could neutralize your entire command structure using nothing but maintenance, equipment, and basic engineering knowledge. The implications were staggering. For 5,000 years, the Academy had trained military leaders to fight external threats while assuming their own facilities were secure. The humans had shown that this assumption was catastrophically wrong. But the real shock came from the alien cadets themselves. Instead of outrage at the humans' violation of established protocols, they were fascinated. Hegemony cadets who had never questioned orders were asking why command centers were not better protected. Collective units were wondering if their dependence on central coordination made them vulnerable to exactly this kind of attack. The Academy's social order was not just cracking. It was shattering completely. In the aftermath of the exercise, Commander Thane called an emergency assembly of all cadets and instructors. The Academy's Great Hall had never hosted such a chaotic gathering. Alien species that normally maintained careful separation were mixed together in animated discussions. The rigid hierarchy that had governed the institution for millennia was dissolving into something entirely new. This exercise has revealed significant deficiencies in our traditional approaches, Thane announced, his words carrying across the hall in the silence that followed. The human methods, while unorthodox, have demonstrated tactical possibilities that our conventional training failed to consider. Tom stood among his fellow humans, watching alien faces that were struggling to process concepts their species had never encountered. The Academy had been designed to preserve military traditions across the galaxy. Instead, it was about to become the birthplace of a revolution that would change warfare forever. The humans had been brought to the Academy to be shaped by alien wisdom. Instead, they had done something far more dangerous. They had taught the galaxy's future military leaders to think for themselves. The alert sirens shattered the Academy's artificial night cycle with a sound that had not been heard in over 2 centuries. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in harsh red illumination as automated systems began sealing blast doors and activating defensive shields. This was not another training exercise or simulation. The Void Hunters had found the Academy. Rick Turner rolled out of his narrow bed as the deck plates vibrated beneath his feet. Through his small window, space itself seemed to be boiling as reality twisted around the emerging enemy fleet. The Void Hunters did not travel through normal hyperspace. They tore holes in the fabric of existence and poured through like infection. Spreading through a wound, the Academy's communication systems crackled with panicked reports from across the facility. Sensor operators struggled to count enemy ships. As their forms shifted between dimensions, appearing solid one moment and translucent the next. Traditional scanners, designed to track conventional vessels, could barely register the biological nightmares that served as Void Hunter warships. Commander Thane's voice echoed through the Academy's corridors, maintaining professional calm despite the impossible situation unfolding around them. All cadets and instructors report to designated combat stations immediately. This is not a drill. The Academy is under direct attack by hostile forces. Tom Reed met his fellow humans in the corridor, each of them carrying whatever weapons they had been able to acquire during their time at the Academy. The alien-designed firearms felt wrong in human hands. Their controls optimized for species with different nervous systems and reaction times. But weapons were weapons, and humans had always been adaptable when it came to tools of violence. How many ships? Amy asked as they jogged toward their assigned positions. Bob Santos was monitoring Academy systems through a handheld device he had modified to interface with alien technology. Sensors can't get an accurate count, but it looks like at least 50 major vessels with hundreds of smaller craft. They're using some kind of dimensional phasing that makes tracking impossible. The Academy's defensive strategy was comprehensive and logical, developed over centuries to counter every known form of attack. Orbital weapon platforms would engage enemy ships at maximum range, while fighter squadrons conducted hit-and-run attacks to disrupt enemy formations. The Academy itself would serve as a fortified base of operations, its massive structure providing cover for defensive forces. The strategy lasted approximately 12 minutes. The Void Hunter assault began with a coordinated strike that bypassed every defensive system the Academy possessed. Their bioships phased through solid matter to emerge inside the facility's shield perimeter, while others simply absorbed weapon fire without apparent damage. The orbital platforms found themselves shooting at targets that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. In the Academy's command center, alien instructors watched their carefully planned defenses crumble with terrifying speed. The hegemony forces maintained perfect formation, while being systematically destroyed by enemies they could not effectively target. The collective units coordinated flawlessly as their shared consciousness was disrupted by Void Hunter bioweapons that attacked neural networks directly. "Sir, we're losing contact with Defensive Grid 7," reported an Apex Hunter whose superhuman reflexes had not been fast enough to track enemies that moved through folded space. "The Void Hunters are adapting to our weapon frequencies faster than we can modify them." Commander Thane studied the tactical display with growing desperation. Every conventional response had been anticipated and countered by an enemy that seemed to learn from each exchange. 5,000 years of military doctrine was proving useless against creatures that evolved their tactics in real time. "What is the status of our cadet forces?" Thane asked. "The alien cadets are performing admirably, sir, but they're following standard protocols against an enemy that does not respond to standard tactics. Casualties are mounting rapidly." "And the humans?" A pause. "Sir, the humans have disappeared again." Dave Mitchell led his Marines through maintenance tunnels that most Academy personnel did not know existed. Bob's modifications to the facility's infrastructure had created new pathways throughout the structure, allowing human forces to move without being detected by sensors designed to track movement through official corridors. "Contact front," whispered one of Dave's scouts, peering around a corner into a section where Void Hunter bioforms had breached the Academy's hull. The creatures were unlike anything in human experience, writhing masses of organic tissue that pulsed with their own bioluminescence. Armed with weapons that were grown rather than manufactured, standard Academy doctrine would have called for establishing defensive positions and requesting backup from properly equipped units. Dave's approach was characteristically direct. "Fix bayonets. We're going in loud and ugly." The human assault was everything alien military science considered wrong. They charged directly into superior numbers without proper reconnaissance or backup. They used improvised weapons cobbled together from maintenance equipment. They communicated through shouted curses and hand signals instead of sophisticated tactical networks. It was also devastatingly effective. The Void Hunters had evolved to counter conventional alien warfare. Energy weapons that could be absorbed, coordinated tactics that could be predicted, and technological systems that could be disrupted. They had not evolved to deal with humans beating them to death with improvised clubs while screaming battle cries in languages that had never been heard in space. Amy Foster took a different approach to the aerial combat above the Academy. While alien pilots engaged in elegant dogfights following established fighter tactics, she led a squadron of maintenance craft and training vessels toward the enemy fleet. The improvised squadron included 2 hegemony cadets, 3 collective units, and an Apex Hunter who had volunteered for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission. "This is insane," transmitted one of the hegemony pilots as they approached a Void Hunter bioship the size of a city block. "These vessels are not equipped for combat operations." "Neither were crop dusters and mail planes," Amy replied, referencing human history that meant nothing to her alien companions. "But humans have used them to win wars before." The Academy's sensor operators watched in amazement as the ramshackle human squadron performed maneuvers that violated every principle of safe flying. Amy deliberately overloaded her craft's engines to create unpredictable acceleration patterns. That made targeting impossible. When conventional weapons proved ineffective against Void Hunter bioarmor, she rammed her maintenance vessel directly into the creature's sensory organs. The alien cadets flying with her were forced to abandon everything they had learned about proper formation flying. Instead, they followed Amy's lead in a chaotic ballet of improvised violence that left even the adaptive Void Hunters struggling to respond back in the Academy's depths. Lisa Wong had taken control of the facility's communication systems using knowledge Bob had provided about their modified infrastructure. While alien commanders struggled with disrupted networks and jammed frequencies, Lisa established a primitive but effective command structure using basic radio protocols that the Void Hunters could not interfere with. All human units, this is. Wong, the Academy's main reactor is overloading. We have approximately 20 minutes before containment failure. Bob Santos was responsible for the reactor situation, though not through any malfunction. He had convinced a team of alien engineering cadets to help him rig the facility's power core as an improvised weapon. When the alien cadets protested that it violated every safety protocol in existence, Bob had responded with humanity's unofficial engineering motto, "If it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid." The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Instead of trying to defend the Academy, they would turn the entire facility into a massive bomb. The reactor overload would create an explosion large enough to destroy any Void Hunter forces in the immediate area, while escape pods and shuttles evacuated Academy personnel to minimum safe distance. This approach will result in the complete destruction of a facility that has stood for 5 millennia, protested one of the Hegemony engineering cadets. Buildings can be rebuilt, Bob replied while routing power through systems that were never designed to handle such loads. People can't be brought back from the dead. The evacuation began as human teams fought delaying actions throughout the Academy. Rick Turner and his Special Operations Group held critical corridors while alien cadets and instructors evacuated through routes that Bob's teams kept open by constantly rerouting power and life support. The battle was chaos by any conventional measure. Human forces operated without central command, making tactical decisions on the fly based on immediate circumstances rather than predetermined plans. They used whatever weapons came to hand, from alien energy rifles to pieces of broken machinery. They communicated through shouted orders and improvised signals that could not be intercepted or decoded, but it worked. The Void Hunters, for the first time in their parasitic existence, found themselves fighting an enemy that defied adaptation. Every time they evolved a counter to human tactics, the humans changed their approach completely. There was no pattern to learn from, no doctrine to study, no predictable behavior to exploit. Commander Thane found himself in the surreal position of coordinating an evacuation while Rick Turner physically dragged him toward an escape pod. A Void Hunter bioform had cornered the Academy's command staff in a corridor that was rapidly losing atmosphere. Standard protocol would have been to establish a defensive perimeter and wait for rescue. Rick's solution was to tackle the Academy's commanding officer and carry him to safety while shooting at aliens with a weapon he had never used before. The bioform, expecting rational military behavior, was completely unprepared for a human who treated a superior officer like a sack of grain and combat like a bar fight. "This is highly irregular," Thane protested as Rick shoved him into an escape pod designed for much smaller occupants. "Sir, with respect, irregular is what we do best," Rick replied, cramming 3 Hegemony instructors into the remaining space before sealing the hatch. The final phase of the battle occurred as Academy personnel reached minimum safe distance in their escape pods and shuttles. Bob's improvised weapon was ready to detonate, but the Void Hunter fleet showed no signs of retreating. Their bioships continued pouring through dimensional rifts, apparently willing to sacrifice themselves to destroy the Academy. This was exactly what Amy had been waiting for. Her remaining squadron, now reduced to 5 functional craft of various types, positioned themselves between the massed Void Hunter fleet and the Academy. It was a gesture that appeared suicidal by any rational analysis. 5 small vessels against hundreds of bioships would normally result in instant annihilation, but Amy had learned something during her months at the Academy that no instructor had intended to teach. The alien cadets flying with her had stopped following their species' traditional tactics. Instead, they had embraced the human approach of doing whatever worked, regardless of how insane it appeared. "All craft, this is Foster. When that reactor blows, we're going to ride the shockwave straight into their formation. Use the explosion to mask our approach, then hit everything you can reach. The hegemony pilot in her squadron actually laughed. A sound his species was not supposed to be capable of producing. Cadet Foster, this plan violates approximately 200 safety regulations and contradicts every principle of tactical fighter deployment. Is that a problem? Not anymore. The Academy's reactor detonated with the force of a small star going nova. The explosion vaporized the ancient facility instantly, creating an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that consumed everything within a 50-kilometer radius. Void Hunter bioships caught in the blast were reduced to constituent atoms before they could adapt to the new threat. Amy's squadron rode the shockwave like surfers on a tsunami, using the explosion's energy to accelerate to speeds that should have torn their craft apart. They emerged from the plasma storm in the midst of the confused Void Hunter fleet, firing everything they had at targets too close to miss. The effect was catastrophic for the bioships. Their adaptive defenses were overwhelmed by attacks coming from impossible directions at impossible speeds. More importantly, the loss of the Academy and the unexpected human tactics had disrupted their collective consciousness enough to interfere with their coordination. The Void Hunter fleet began a chaotic retreat, their bioships phasing back into dimensional rifts without the organized precision they had shown during the attack. For the first time in recorded history, the parasitic species had been forced to abandon an assault by inferior numbers. In the aftermath, rescue ships from across Coalition space converged on the Academy's former location. The facility that had trained military leaders for 5 millennia was gone, reduced to expanding debris and residual radiation. But somehow, impossibly, casualty reports showed that 93% of Academy personnel had survived the battle. Commander Thane floated in the cramped confines of his escape pod, reading damage reports on a handheld display while trying to process what had happened. The Academy was destroyed, the Void Hunters had been repelled, and human tactics had proven effective against an enemy that conventional warfare could not touch. More disturbing was the realization that the alien cadets had fought alongside humans with enthusiasm that bordered on reckless abandon. The careful military discipline that had defined Coalition forces for centuries had been replaced by something resembling organized chaos. Through the pod's small viewport, Thane could see Amy's battered squadron limping back toward the rescue ships. Her maintenance craft was held together by emergency patches and sheer determination, trailing atmosphere and sparks in equal measure. By all rights, she should have been dead 10 times over. Instead, she was requesting permission to land and asking if there were any more Void Hunters that needed shooting. Tom Reed's voice came over the emergency communication channel, somehow managing to coordinate rescue operations using the same primitive radio protocols that had worked during the battle. All human units sound off. We've got search and rescue teams looking for survivors. The response was immediate and chaotic. Human voices filled the comm channel with status reports, location updates, and requests for medical assistance. Mixed among them were alien voices using human communication protocols and even human slang terms they had picked up during their months together. This is Collective Unit 7. We have located debris field containing possible survivors. Proceeding to investigate. Over and out. Thane stared at his display in amazement. A hive mind species was using individual radio call signs and human military terminology. The contamination was complete. The rescue operation continued for hours as ships searched the debris field for survivors and salvageable equipment. Human teams worked alongside alien rescue workers with an efficiency that had nothing to do with traditional protocols and everything to do with shared experience under fire. Bob Santos was found floating in an engineering section that had somehow remained intact, still monitoring reactor readings and making sure the explosion had not created any secondary hazards. Dave Mitchell's Marines had managed to keep a group of injured alien cadets alive in a damaged section by using first aid techniques that were not part of any official curriculum. When the final casualty reports were compiled, the numbers told a story that military analysts would spend years trying to understand. The Academy's destruction had been complete, But the human approach to the battle had saved lives that conventional tactics would have written off as acceptable losses. The Void Hunters had retreated, but more importantly, they had been forced to adapt to human tactics for the first time in their existence. Their next assault would have to account for enemies who fought without predictable patterns or established doctrine. As the rescue fleet prepared to depart for Coalition space, Commander Thane found himself face-to-face with Tom Reed in the medical bay of the flagship. The human was bandaged and exhausted, but his eyes held a confidence that had not been there when he first arrived at the Academy. "The Academy is gone," Thane said quietly. Tom nodded. "Buildings can be rebuilt. The important stuff is right here." He gestured around the medical bay, where human and alien personnel worked together to treat the wounded without regard for species or rank. "The Coalition High Command will want a full report on what happened here. Tell them the truth. We came here to learn how to fight aliens. Instead, we taught aliens how to fight like humans." Thane looked around the medical bay and saw the future of Coalition military doctrine taking shape in real time. Alien cadets were learning human battlefield medicine techniques. Human medics were adapting alien medical technology to treat species they had never encountered before. The rigid hierarchies that had defined military service for millennia were dissolving into something entirely new. "What happens now?" Thane asked. Tom smiled, and for the first time since the Academy's destruction, Thane found himself smiling back. "Now we go win a war." The temporary command center buzzed with activity as Coalition High Command struggled to understand reports from across the galaxy. 3 months after the Academy's destruction, every military engagement with the Void Hunters had taken an unexpected turn. Traditional battle plans were being abandoned in favor of tactics that military analysts could barely categorize, much less predict. General Corvan of the Hegemony Empire studied holographic displays showing the liberation of the Outer Rim colonies. What should have been a grinding campaign of attrition had become a series of swift victories achieved through methods that violated every principle of conventio warfare. Human-trained mixed units were achieving impossible objectives while suffering minimal casualties. "Explain to me again how a force of 300 fighters defeated a Void Hunter fleet of 5,000 bioships," Coven demanded of his intelligence staff, the briefing officer. A tall hegemony analyst whose species prided itself on logical thinking struggled to make sense of the reports. "Sir, the human commander divided his force into 30 separate units, each operating independently without central coordination. When the Void Hunters adapted to counter one group's tactics, the other 29 groups used completely different approaches. That should have resulted in catastrophic breakdown of command authority. Yes, sir, it should have. Instead, each unit achieved its objectives while the Void Hunter adaptation protocols became confused by contradictory tactical data. They were trying to counter 30 different fighting styles simultaneously. Similar reports were coming in from every sector where human-influenced units had encountered the enemy. The parasitic species that had terrorized the galaxy for decades was suddenly finding itself outmaneuvered by forces that refused to follow predictable patterns. On the former Academy site, construction crews worked around the clock to build something unprecedented in Coalition history. The new facility would not be a traditional military academy, but rather a training center designed around human principles of adaptive warfare and cross-species cooperation. Amy Foster supervised the installation of flight simulators that could be reconfigured in real time to create unpredictable scenarios. The new training protocols required pilots to adapt to changing conditions rather than master predetermined maneuvers. Alien instructors who had once insisted on perfect formation flying now encouraged students to develop individual styles that could not be easily countered. "The old academy trained students to follow doctrine," Amy explained to a group of collective observers who were documenting the construction process. "This place will train them to create doctrine as they go." The collective units found this concept fascinating. Their hive mind consciousness had always relied on shared knowledge and coordinated thinking, but exposure to human methods had shown them the value of individual initiative, even within their collective structure. How do you maintain unit cohesion when every individual is developing unique approaches? Asked one of the collective observers. You don't maintain it, Amy replied. You build it fresh every time based on what the situation requires. The new curriculum was taking shape under the guidance of human instructors, who had never expected to find themselves teaching aliens how to fight. Tom Reed worked with former Academy staff to develop courses that emphasized adaptability over adherence to established procedures. The goal was not to create perfect soldiers, but rather to produce military leaders who could think independently under pressure. Rick Turner's Special Operations Training Program had become the most requested course in the new academy. His methods were simple in concept but revolutionary in practice. Students learned to use whatever resources were available rather than relying on prescribed equipment. They practiced making tactical decisions without complete information. Most importantly, they learned to question orders that did not make sense in their immediate situation. Traditional military thinking assumes that superior firepower and better organization will always defeat inferior forces, Rick explained to a mixed class of alien cadets. But the Void Hunters have superior firepower and perfect organization. What they don't have is the ability to think like humans. A young apex hunter raised one of his forearms. How do we learn to think like humans when we are not human ourselves? You already are, Rick replied. 6 months ago, you would never have questioned an instructor's statement. You would have accepted my explanation and moved on to the next lesson. But you just asked me to justify my reasoning. That's human thinking. Question everything, especially the stuff that sounds obvious. The Academy's new motto, written in 12 languages including English, was displayed prominently in every classroom. Excellence through adaptation. But the real change was visible in the interactions between different species throughout the facility. Dave Mitchell's urban warfare course included cadets from 7 different species, working together to clear simulated buildings using techniques that had never appeared in any military manual. Hegemony precision was combined with collective coordination, and apex hunter speed, all guided by human adaptability. The resulting tactical approaches were unlike anything seen before in coalition military history. Bob Santos had perhaps the most important job in the new academy, teaching alien engineers to think like humans. His courses covered everything from improvised weapons construction to turning civilian infrastructure into military assets. The engineering principles were sound, but the applications horrified species that had spent millennia developing proper safety protocols. Safety regulations exist for good reasons, protested a hegemony engineering cadet after Bob demonstrated how to turn a food synthesizer into an explosive device. Bypassing them creates unnecessary risks. Everything creates risks, Bob replied while dismantling his improvised bomb. The question is whether you want controlled risks that you understand or uncontrolled risks that kill you by surprise. The Academy's new approach was spreading throughout coalition space faster than official communications could track. Military units that included human-trained personnel were sharing tactics with other units, creating a viral spread of adaptive thinking that was transforming the entire coalition military structure. Commander Thane, now serving as the Academy's director, found himself in the unprecedented position of managing an institution that actively encouraged insubordination and creative interpretation of orders. The careful hierarchies that had governed military service for millennia were being replaced by something that resembled organized chaos but somehow produced better results than traditional approaches. Sir, we're receiving complaints from sector commanders about units refusing to follow established battle plans, reported his aide, a former Academy instructor who was still adjusting to the new reality. What are the results of these units' engagements? Thane asked. Victory rates have increased by 400%. Casualties have dropped by 60%, and mission completion times have been cut in half. Then I suggest the sector commanders learn to write better battle plans. The transformation was not without resistance. Conservative elements within the coalition military, Hierarchy argued that discipline and order were more important than tactical innovation. Some species found it difficult to abandon traditions that had served them well for centuries, but the results spoke for themselves. Every engagement where human-influenced tactics were employed resulted in coalition victory. The Void Hunters, after millennia of successful conquest, were being systematically driven back by forces they could no longer predict or counter. The war's turning point came during the Battle of the Core Worlds, where the largest Void Hunter fleet in recorded history attempted to strike at the heart of coalition space. Traditional defensive strategies would have resulted in a grinding siege that might have lasted years while consuming millions of lives. Instead, coalition forces under mixed human-alien command used every unorthodox tactic that had been developed during the Academy's transformation. They turned the enemy's size against them by creating chaos within their formations. They used improvised weapons and suicide tactics that the Void Hunters could not adapt to quickly enough. Most importantly, they fought as individuals within coordinated groups rather than as identical units following identical plans. The Void Hunter fleet was not just defeated. It was annihilated in less than 18 hours of combat. The parasitic species that had terrorized the galaxy suddenly found itself facing extinction as coalition forces pressed their advantage using tactics that could not be countered through adaptation. Lisa Wong, now serving as the Academy's communications director, coordinated the final phase of the war using networks that mixed the most advanced alien technology with primitive human radio protocols. The combination was impossible to jam and difficult to intercept, allowing coalition forces to maintain coordination even when fighting enemies that specialized in disrupting electronic communications. All units, this is Command, the Void Hunter. Home dimension has been located. We're going to finish this war the way humans finish things, quickly and with extreme prejudice. The final assault on the Void Hunter home dimension was led by Academy graduates who had learned to combine the best aspects of every species. Military traditions with human adaptability and innovation. They fought with hegemony, precision, and collective coordination. But they thought like humans when the situation required impossible solutions. Tom Reed, now a general in the reformed coalition military, stood on the bridge of the flagship as the assault force emerged into the twisted reality of the Void Hunter home dimension. Around him, alien officers who had once insisted on following proper protocols were improvising solutions to problems that had never been encountered before. "Sir, the dimensional physics here don't match our models," reported the navigator, an apex hunter whose enhanced reflexes were struggling to track space that folded back on itself. "Then we make new models," Tom replied. "Bob, can you rig our engines to work in this environment?" Santos was already elbow-deep in control systems that had never been designed for modification under combat conditions. "Give me 10 minutes and a lot of luck. You've got both." The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human-trained coalition forces fought their way through reality itself, adapting to physics that changed from moment to moment while pursuing an enemy that was literally fighting for survival in its own home dimension. But the Void Hunters had learned to fight conventional forces, not enemies who treated the impossible as merely another engineering problem to solve. When their dimensional barriers proved ineffective against ships that had been modified in real time, when their bioweapons met improvised countermeasures that should not have worked, when their perfect adaptation encountered tactical flexibility that had no pattern to adapt to, they finally understood what they were truly facing. Humanity had not just joined the galaxy's military forces. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to be human. The war ended not with the Void Hunters' extinction, but with their surrender, a concept that had never existed in their species' consciousness until they encountered enemies who fought like humans. They agreed to withdraw to their home dimension permanently, accepting exile rather than face continued destruction by forces they could never learn to defeat. In the aftermath, the Academy continued its work of training military leaders who could think beyond the boundaries of their species' traditional approaches. The facility grew to accommodate students from newly contacted civilizations, each bringing their own perspectives to be combined with human adaptability. Commander Thane, now bearing the scars of multiple battles and the wisdom that came from learning to think like a human, addressed the Academy's first official graduation ceremony. The assembled cadets represented dozens of species, but they shared something that transcended biological differences. They had learned to question everything, adapt constantly, and never accept that something was impossible just because it had never been done before. 5 years ago, this academy summoned humans to learn proper military doctrine, Thane began, his words carrying across the assembly hall to graduates who included humans, aliens, and hybrid units that had never existed before humanity's arrival. Instead, humanity taught us that there is no such thing as proper doctrine. There is only what works, what doesn't work, and what works better than anything we tried before. He paused, looking out at faces that represented the future of galactic civilization. The humans came here as primitives from a backwater world. They leave as the teachers who transformed how the galaxy defends itself. But more importantly, they leave behind something that will outlast any individual war or conflict. The knowledge that our greatest strength was never our technology or our traditions. It was our willingness to learn from each other. The graduation ceremony concluded with something unprecedented in Academy history: controlled chaos. Human whoops and cheers mixed with alien applause and species-specific expressions of approval. Military precision gave way to enthusiastic celebration as graduates, who had learned to think like humans, expressed their joy in whatever manner felt appropriate. As the celebration continued into the station's night cycle, Tom Reed found himself standing in the Academy's Memorial Hall, looking at a wall that honored those who had died defending the galaxy. Among the names inscribed in multiple languages were humans and aliens who had fought together, learned together, and ultimately changed the course of galactic history together. Amy Foster joined him, now wearing the insignia of a senior flight instructor, but still carrying the confident smile of someone who had learned to make the impossible look routine. Any regrets about coming here? Tom considered the question while watching Academy graduates celebrate with an enthusiasm that would have horrified the institution's original founders. The careful, sterile precision of the old Academy had been replaced by something that was messier but infinitely more alive. Just one, he replied finally. I wish we could have taught them to be human sooner. Outside the Academy's vast windows, coalition ships departed for assignments throughout the galaxy, their crews trained in tactics that combined the best of multiple species with human adaptability. The war was over, but the revolution was just beginning. Humanity had been summoned to learn from aliens. Instead, they had taught the galaxy something far more valuable: that the best way to face an uncertain future was to never stop learning, never stop adapting, and never stop believing that today's impossible was tomorrow's standard operating procedure. The Academy's new motto proved prophetic. Excellence through adaptation had become the galaxy's new way of life.